Welcome to episode 17 of Our College, Your Voices. I'm your host, Kara Monroe. Welcome back to the spring semester. Students and faculty began classes on Monday of this week, and we are already back in full swing. Colleges and universities across the country rely on various methods to assure that they are performing at the highest levels of quality. One of the most important of those is what is called regional accreditation. This year, Ivy Tech is up for its Reaffirmation of Accreditation, an event that occurs once every 10 years. We have a series of episodes planned for the spring that will come to you to discuss the accreditation process and Ivy Tech's efforts to prepare for accreditation. In today's episode, I'm joined by a couple of folks you've heard from before, Dr. Russ Baker and Dr. Rod Brown, who are two of about 10 members of the Higher Learning Commission Peer Corps. Peer Corps members come from institutions of higher education across the country. Dr. Brown and Dr. Baker represent us on teams that visit other institutions across the Higher Learning Commission's 19-state region. Let's meet our panel. Hi, Rod.
Hi, Kara. I'm Rod Brown, and I currently serve as the Vice Chancellor of Academic Affairs for Ivy Tech Indianapolis.
And you have been in that role for just a few days now.
Yes, ma'am.
Congratulations, Rod. And Dr. Russ Baker. Hi, Russ.
How are you?
I'm good.
I'm Russ Baker, Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs. I've been a Peer Corps member for about 10 years and probably done about 12 visits during that time.
And I'm probably going to jump in on this conversation too. I've been a Peer Corps member for a while, so I'll probably throw in my 2 cents every once in a while. So to each of you, why did you choose to join the Peer Corps?
Well, I'll be glad to start. I've been a member of the Peer Corps since October of 2015. And the reason I decided to join was actually for several reasons. First of all, I had just completed my doctorate in 2014. And I know this is going to sound really nerdy, but I was looking for another intellectual challenge. And the Peer Corps seemed a natural fit for me. Also, I had worked in central office, now systems office, during the last HLC visit, so back in 2008 and 2009. And I actually co-authored the diversity chapter for our self-study. And that gave me a good sense of kind of what the work is from an institutional perspective, but not from the perspective of the commission. And I had some wonderful mentors while I was there, Dr. Becky Nicolai and Dr. Ben Young, both of whom have since retired. But they were also extremely supportive of my work and my interest in serving on the Peer Corps.
And for me, I started at Ivy Tech in 2006. And at that time, we were just beginning to gear up towards our visit in 2009. And Dr. Marnia Kennan, who a few people who have been at Ivy Tech for some time will remember, was encouraging people at Ivy Tech to join the Peer Corps because we were basically trying to boost our number of Ivy Tech folks who were Peer Corps reviewers. And so I had just started at Ivy Tech up in Fort Wayne as the Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs up there. And I decided it was a good way for professional development. Dr. Nicolai was one of our peer reviewers at that time. And I remember her saying, this is the best professional development you'll ever do. And so I thought, this seems like a good opportunity. As Rod said, I'd completed my doctoral degree a few years before that. And this felt like a good way to stay engaged. So I went through training, and I think my first visit was in 2009. But I really chose to be a Peer Corps reviewer just for the opportunity to see what other institutions were doing. And I felt like it'd be a good way to stay current with practices and institutions that were similar to ours.
So Russ, you alluded to training. What I think we all became Peer Corps members at slightly different times, so that training does change. But can you guys give me a general sense of the training that Peer Corps members receive?
Well, I'm guessing that Rod's experience being trained maybe 4 years ago is quite a bit different than mine. And then I know you've been trained as a chair as well,
yes,
which I've not done. For me, I went to suburban Chicago for training at a training center that the HLC used at the time. And it was about 3 days of pretty intense training there on site every day. I remember Dr. Nicolai was there at the time. Jim Smith, who's now in Bloomington, he was being trained as a peer reviewer at that time. Dr. Nicolai was being trained to be a chair. So they were doing several different levels of training all at one sitting. But it was about 3 days of pretty intense work.
The training for me was pretty much the same, except that we were in much nicer accommodations. In 2015, we actually were staying at a hotel as opposed to an actual training center. But essentially, everything you described, Russ, was about the same. 3 days of very intense training. There's a fictional university that they use, and we're essentially asked to go through all the different components of the institution, mapping them against the criteria, and how we would, as peer reviewers, rate according to whether a core component is met with concerns or not met at all, and what the implications are. Chair training wasn't that much different, except it talked a lot more about how we work with the dynamics, not just within the teams that are convened, but also our role is with the Higher Learning Commission itself. And that was actually at the aforementioned training center. So I had a chance to experience both. Really missed the hotel. But anyway, it was a lot of fun.
And my training echoes yours, but my chair training was actually online. So I did one of their experimental online trainings, which was interesting as well. So I love online training, but I think I would have enjoyed that doing it as face-to-face. Rod, you started to talk about the criterion. Can you guys describe a little bit about how Peer Corps members actually evaluate? Do they get to pick anything they want to, or is there a set of standards they have to use?
That's a great question, Kara. And it's been my experience, having served on now 5 teams, that you're selected based on your expertise, even though you're expected to have at least a baseline knowledge of all the 5 criteria. So frequently, when I'm called upon to serve on teams, I'm looking at criteria that focus on the mission of the institution and on teaching and learning, because that's my background, both from a student affairs perspective and an academic affairs perspective. Higher Learning Commission is very strategic as far as what they do when they're putting teams together. And so one of the benefits, at least from my perspective, is I'm working alongside those who are chief academic officers, student affairs professionals, executive directors of finance, and those types. And so not only am I learning about the institution, I'm also learning from my other colleagues in the field from across the country.
Yeah.
And I have always ended up being assigned to either criterion 3 or 4 in all the teams I've been on. And I would say, as Rod said, that's because the teams are deliberately put together by the HLC, I think, to at least to the best of their knowledge, to the best they can, they want to reflect the kinds of expertise that's required for those 5 criteria. I was just on an HLC visit 2 weeks ago in Ohio, and what our chair did is, I think, probably similar to what you and Rod do when you're chairing a team. The first meeting we had, which was a teleconference about 2 months before the actual visit, she went through the criteria and basically asked us to identify which one we were most comfortable in focusing on. This gets into the weeds a little bit, but I think some chairs still have each team member have both a primary and a secondary criterion that they work on. The last chair that I worked under for the HLC visit in Ohio didn't do that. She actually said she just wanted us to each have one. And I actually found that worked really well, because you just could really, it didn't mean that you ignored the others. You were still expected to read all the arguments, et cetera. But when it came to writing your assurance arguments, it was real clear who was doing what. And that seemed to work well.
I had pretty much, I've been on both sides of that. My very first visit, we were a small team. And so we were each assigned multiple criteria. And then I've been on larger teams where I've shared the writing with another colleague. And I'm not yet sure which I prefer. I think the only child in me likes to have responsibility for just my only one.
I knew you'd say that.
You knew that was coming, right? I did. But at the same time, there is some benefit when you have someone who is of like mind and spirit when it comes to this work, to work alongside with you to maybe fill in the gaps if there's an area that perhaps you've missed.
My last visit was to a school in Illinois, and we had backup chapter for each of us. It came to be really important because we had a member who had to bow out about 5 days before the visit because of a family emergency, and then another one had a heart attack the night before we were supposed to leave. So we were down to 3 members. So luckily, we were still able to cover everything because we had been preparing and reading it. Both of those people and their families, thankfully, are okay, but it was a good reason. It was a good lesson for me as a chair why you use the backups. It was important. So we've talked a little bit about the criteria. Tell me a little bit more about how you actually use them during a visit.
Well, there are 5 criteria and then a number of core components under each one of the criteria. And so the way they're used in a site visit is essentially taking the broad criterion and the core components and inverting them into a series of questions. So for example, criterion 1 talks about the mission. And incidentally, all of these are available on the Higher Learning Commission's website. I think sometimes the average faculty or staff member has this idea that this is some mystical process, and it really isn't.
Right.
HLCommission.org, I'll say it again, HLCommission.org, and click on criteria for accreditation, and it will bring up all the criteria and the core components. So as I was saying, for example, criterion 1 speaks to mission. The statement is the institution's mission is clear and articulated publicly. It guides the institution's operations. Well, from a peer reviewer perspective, it becomes a question. So does the institution's mission, is it clear? Is it articulated publicly? To what extent does it guide the institution's operations? And I think as we're preparing for an accreditation visit, that's really probably one of the best ways to approach these criteria and as far as preparing for the visit.
I agree. The criteria ultimately pretty much drive everything we do on the visit. At least, again, you referencing the most recent one, under criterion 4, which was the criteria that I was assigned to this last time, there are 3 subcomponents to criterion 4. And there are specific questions that you need to answer on each one of those. And of course, in the evidentiary or the assurance argument that the institution submits before you go on your visit, you see what their answer is to each one of those and the evidence that they've provided. And then our chair this last time actually asked us to basically have all of our evidentiary statements written before we went on the visit. I love that, because basically what you did then was affirm after you got there that the things that the institution said were true. Now, of course, we met before we started our visit and identified areas where we thought we needed to ask some questions, things that we thought might be missing. So we had questions strategically determined ahead of time, but basically we were affirming the evidence that they had already submitted. And probably 80% of our written work, this may seem counterintuitive, and the team that comes to Ivy Tech in April may not do this. I mean, it depends on how the chair wants to divide out the work and to assign it. This was the first time I'd had a chair that did that. But probably 80% of our writing as a team was done before we got there.
In the training, they mentioned, the trainers say it's important to go ahead and start writing first before you arrive on the campus. And the reason for that is a lot of people don't realize these visits are relatively short. They're very intense, but they're short. On a typical visit, the team arrives on a Sunday, and as Russ mentioned, there may have been some, or there should have been some preliminary discussions via phone, but this is the first time that this group has actually come together and they're face-to-face. Sunday is a discussion of strategy, followed by a long day on Monday of several interviews and several conversations, followed by another half day, really, of additional conversations, a wrap-up, and then lots of writing from Tuesday afternoon into Wednesday. And so there needs to be quite a bit of preparation up front, and a lot of important questions need to be brainstormed ahead of time before the team arrives on campus.
And with that visit that I just had that ended with just 3 members on the team, because we had a draft of the entire report done, we still left with a completely finished, really good draft. We were just polishing after. What advice would you offer to those preparing for a visit as Ivy Tech is? Give us some free consulting.
First, I would say it's very important to review the criteria and work with all members of the institution to understand what the implications are so that any question that is asked regarding the criteria can be answered at least to some level. You'd be surprised how very basic questions sometimes get ignored, like what's the mission of the institution? I know that our mission statement here at Ivy Tech is a bit long and a bit complicated, but at least getting to the spirit and understanding what the mission of the institution is is very important. And then understanding what the criteria are, and then the most important part is understanding the evidence that's attached to them. It's very easy, and we see this, and I've seen this a lot with institutions where there's reference to evidence in their assurance argument, but there really isn't evidence so much as a lot of words, and that can be detrimental to an institution. So if, for example, we say that for criterion 3, that the institution provides high quality education wherever and however its offerings are delivered, well, in a tangible sense, what does that look like? To what can we point to say, yes, we have evidence that demonstrates. So I would say that's one area that where an institution could prepare for a visit.
Well, the one thing that comes to mind right away when I hear your question is that the team is going to definitely be looking for evidence that our faculty is engaged and knowledgeable about what we're doing with assessment. Criterion 4 is still the most frequently cited criterion, as I understand, across the entire HLC, where it's most often met with concerns or perhaps even in worst case scenarios not met. And I think that, again, referencing my recent visit, I think the faculty there, and it was, a single institution, not nearly the size and scope that Ivy Tech has with our multiple campuses, but they were well prepared. It was clear to jump right in with enthusiasm to answer questions about the mission, as Rod already mentioned, and assessment. They knew what the mission was. This particular institution didn't have the mission plastered all over. I've seen some campuses that I've gone to where it's everywhere.
Yes.
You tend to wonder if they just put those up right before the visit. But in this case, it wasn't. Their mission wasn't, all over in terms of signage, but the whole team, not just faculty, but staff, clearly knew what it was and made reference to it. Things like that stand out to the team by the time they leave the campus. Yeah. Again, the enthusiasm and the knowledge of the faculty about what they were doing with assessment and their ability to articulate that was really important.
I'd also say that it's very important when a team comes to campus that the entire community is honest in terms of its successes as well as its challenges.
Right.
It does really the institution no good if there are areas of concern that are not at least being acknowledged.
Right.
The best conversations I think that I've heard when I've been on other campuses is, yes, this is a challenge. We recognize it. And this is how we plan to deal with it, or this is how we are dealing with it. That's a much healthier conversation, I think, to have during a site visit than to deny that there's a problem.
Exactly.
I think the other thing, too, is just from a very much a human perspective is to show some measure of hospitality to the peer review team. Remember, these are individuals who have accepted an invitation to serve, and they're coming from institutions very much like our own. So the team who will come to visit Ivy Tech in April, they have regular jobs. I mean, they're serving in different capacities at their own institutions. The majority of them are coming from community colleges. They have day jobs, and they've taken time out to serve and to provide information, service to our accrediting body. So a level of hospitality is extremely important. I would say that those are important factors as well.
Yeah. Agreed.
I just add an anecdote again from the recent visit. Our team chair, as Rod said, typically the teams arrive on Sunday afternoon, and our team chair took a little stroll around the campus that I recently visited when she first arrived. And she encountered a staff person at one of the venues that she just walked in, who, even after she had identified who she was and, asked a couple questions, her impression of the staff member was that the staff member didn't particularly care and wasn't particularly impressed. That's just, one story, but that's not the kind of thing that gets the visit off to a great start.
Yeah.
We don't know still what exactly our visit is going to look like when the HLC team comes, because we are such a bigger nut to crack. It's still hard for me to believe that our team will only be here all day Monday and half the day Tuesday.
Right.
Given that fact, they may extend their visit, or we don't know. But what my point is every interaction that team has, they should at least feel like people are welcoming to them. I don't think they want to feel like everyone, hands them a gift, but just being open.
Please don't do that. That's another piece of advice. Don't do that.
So she just relayed, as soon as we had our first team meeting on Sunday evening, she relayed this first interaction that wasn't that positive. So hopefully that's not something that will happen again.
Well, and the other side of it is, I'm thinking about one of the visits I was on recently, not my most recent one, where it was at a very small town in the southeastern part of the country. And not only when we arrived there, we were greeted by the president of the institution. The hotel where we were staying had actually placed on their marquee, "Welcome Higher Learning Commission Peer Review Team."
Nice.
Maybe nice, maybe not. It was definitely something we did not expect to see.
Oh, really? I've seen that before.
Yeah,
so,
we didn't expect to see that before. It was great. There was a backdrop. There was a Ponderosa Steakhouse in the background. It was magnificent.
Well, those are a good segue to any other funny visit stories. And I will say, we are, as Peer Corps members, we are asked to keep the sort of institutions confidential. So we've referenced states and locations, but we don't talk about actual institutions. But any funny visit stories to tell? Besides the Ponderosa Steakhouse, of course.
I'm thinking about one of my favorite visits, and it wasn't just so much that the institution was well prepared. It was the dynamic between all these people who essentially began as strangers on a Sunday evening. And by the end of it, we were a large group for this, and it was because they were multi-campus. And so some of us would, I think it was that Tuesday morning, some of us went to one location and others went to another. But we got along so well, even within our disagreements, that we essentially started joking with ourselves. One person seemed like he was the character on Law and Order: Criminal Intent. And we just kind of ran with that. And so by the end, all of us had assigned roles, and these would be our doppelgangers if we were, cast members in Law and Order. But
cool.
We had a wonderful time. Awesome. And I still, the nice thing about this kind of work is you meet so many passionate individuals who are, again, of like mind about the importance of higher education. And so the network that opens up to you as a result of this work is just amazing.
The only thing that comes to mind immediately is the typical travel challenges that happen. 3 years ago, in early March, I was assigned to a visit in southern Arkansas, where you don't expect they're going to have snow. But that particular year, we did. I had trouble getting out of Indianapolis. Again, usually you have a team meeting on Sunday night. On Sunday evening, I was still the only one who was there. And then by the time we got to Wednesday and we were supposed to leave, we had trouble getting out again. So the whole thing was kind of impacted by the weather. But, as Rod said, each team develops sort of a unique camaraderie. Usually there are 4 or 5 people on a team. This most recent visit I was on had 5, and maybe just because it's the most recent one in my memory. But by the time that we left on Wednesday afternoon, I felt like a couple of the people on that team, especially, were people with whom I wanted to stay in touch. And we talked about making sure we see each other when we're in Chicago at the HLC conference in the spring. And it really is a good way to develop not just professional relationships, but actual personal friendships as well with people who are passionate about doing this. And nearly all the people that are on the teams that I've been assigned have been from community colleges. Once in a while, there'll be, somebody maybe from a four-year institution, but because the HLC tends to put community college people on community college review teams, it's an opportunity to just work with a lot of people who are passionate about the same things we are.
I never really noticed when I first attended an HLC conference in Chicago, and I went to my first peer reviewer meeting. This was before I officially went through the training. The amount of energy and excitement from these people who, under normal circumstances, would probably be highly introverted, but they're seeing folks across these huge ballrooms, and they're running up and giving people hugs and how are you doing? It's been so long. And now that I've been doing these visits for a while, I get it. Because you do develop a very, some very quick and important relationships with these individuals.
Yeah, if it's the best legacy we can leave, we'll continue. Dr. Nikolai, who also recruited me, will continue her mantra that it's the best professional development you can ever get. I think it's the best networking you can ever get.
Absolutely, yes.
Every episode ends with a call to action. This is the first of a series of episodes on our Reaffirmation of Accreditation visit. Have a question for a future episode? Leave us a voicemail, reach out on Twitter, or drop us an email, and we will answer your question in an upcoming episode. We will also link to both the criterion as well as another document called the Assumed Practices of the Higher Learning Commission in our show notes. You can read those if you haven't had a chance to do so yet. And as Rod said, those are available on their website. Thank you for joining episode 17 of Our College, Your Voices. I want to thank the members of today's panel. Dr. Russ Baker is Vice President for Academic Affairs at Ivy Tech Community College, and Dr. Rod Brown is the newly appointed Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs for the Indianapolis campus. Congratulations again, Rod.
Thank you.
I'm your host, Kara Monroe. You can connect with me on Twitter at KNMTweets. Our producer is Ann Valentine. Ann is on Twitter at IndyPenny. You can reach us by email at ourcollegeyourvoices@ivytech.edu. Don't forget, you can also now leave us a voicemail at 317-572-5049. And if you ask a question, we may use that in a future episode. And don't forget our special 25th episode that's coming up on March 14th. We will answer questions as well as play shout outs to other colleagues here at the college. Our website is ivytech.edu/podcast. It's maintained by Tracy Allen. Production assistance for this and every episode is provided by Becky Campbell, Sarah DeWitt, and the Ivy Tech Community College marketing team. Our podcast concept is by Matthew Pittman. Theme music, recording, and post-production services are provided by the incredible Jen Eads at the Brossie Broadcasting Company. We couldn't do it without her. And we will see you next time on Our College, Your Voices.